6.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. So it was the Socialist Wonder Twins against the most of the rest of the panel yesterday, and Dem debate due. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And I think the difference between Sanders and Warren, and say to varying degrees, by the way, it's not monolithic. They're not the same people. But between those two, who are, tier one candidates at this stage, according to the polling, and those that are trying to get into consideration, frankly, Hickenlooper, Delaney, and Tim Ryan. And also,
Hickenlooper was awful last night.
Also, Steve Bullock, the governor of Montana.
Oh,
but that whole dynamic, I thought, nicely encapsulated by this exchange between Elizabeth Warren and John Delaney about, what kind of Democrat Party are we going to be? What kind of nominee are we going to have?
It is my way of talking about I know how to fight and I know how to win. I took on giant banks and I beat them. I took on Wall Street and CEOs and their lobbyists and their lawyers, and I beat them. I took on a popular Republican incumbent senator, and I beat him. I remember when people said Barack Obama couldn't get elected. Shoot, I remember when people said Donald Trump couldn't get elected. But here's where we are. I get it. There is a lot at stake and people are scared. But we can't choose a candidate we don't believe in just because we're too scared to do anything else. And we can't ask other people to vote for a candidate we don't believe in. Democrats win when we figure out what is right and we get out there and fight for it. I am not afraid. And for Democrats to win, you can't be afraid either.
Congressman Delaney, your response?
So I think Democrats win when we run on real solutions, not impossible promises. When we run on things that are workable, not fairy tale economics. Look at the story of Detroit, this amazing city that we're in. This city is turning around because the government and the private sector are working well together. That has to be our model going forward. We need to encourage collaboration between the government, the private sector, and the nonprofit sector, and focus on those kitchen table, pocketbook issues that matter to hardworking Americans: building infrastructure, creating jobs, improving their pay,
Thank you, Congressman.
creating universal health care, lowering drug prices.
Senator
We can
Warren.
do it.
I don't understand why anybody goes to all the trouble of running for president of the United States just to talk about what we really can't do and shouldn't fight for.
Then political pundits on CNN, and that is when John Delaney's presidential run ended. It was ending before it began anyway.
Well, so the choice that was presented, pragmatism from Delaney versus Leninism from Elizabeth Warren, and you heard the crowd, they want the Leninism. For more on this topic, as well as the pending matter of pursuing impeachment against the president, we're pleased to be joined by Elisabeth Spiers. She's the founder of The Insurrection, a progressive digital strategy and polling firm. She's a former editor-in-chief of the New York Observer, and she's written about what the Democrat Party may look like beyond Nancy Pelosi's leadership in the House. Elisabeth, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So how did you receive, I think you come from a different perspective than I do, so how did you receive last night's debate, and what was your takeaway or two from it?
Well, it's funny, I find it preposterous to call Elizabeth Warren a Leninist. She's a progressive capitalist, and that's the core distinction between her and Bernie. Frankly, he's a socialist. But I also, the line that you're talking about, the clip you just played, I thought was sort of the moment of the night, because you could sort of distinguish between the field in terms of which candidates are very aspirational and which ones are kind of more the status quo. And I think she tapped into something that was happening with Delaney, where he was a little bit fatalistic about everything.
I thought he was realistic, not fatalistic. I mean, I said I thought he was realistic, not fatalistic. I mean, they're talking all this free stuff.
I think no. I mean, I think if you didn't bother to read any of Warren's plans, you might think that because she's ambitious. But
Yes,
I don't see
she is.
any candidate. And by the way, this is true of Republicans too. It's a great way to tank a campaign is to just run on the status quo, because that's not what anybody wants on either side. So her point wasn't just about Delaney's ideological orientation. It was also about his motivations for running for president. Nobody really gets into a campaign at the federal level, or shouldn't, to say everything's fine and let's just keep everything the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't energize voters. And there's a certain level of naivete to it. If you do think that everything's hunky-dory, why are you running?
No, that's
so I think
fair.
she tapped into something. There's frustration that people have with candidates like Delaney, regardless of where they are on the ideological spectrum, who get up and just say, we can't do anything.
I was,
and that would be true if they were Republicans. It's not really. It's kind of a secular principle that has nothing to do with political orientation or ideology. It's just, what do voters get energized by, and who's going to run the best campaign given that?
no, you must have. I was a bit surprised, and you must have been disappointed that the issue of impeachment didn't come up, and you would think that would be a question that they would want to tackle after the Mueller testimony last week. Do you want those presidential candidates to weigh in on whether or not Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are wrong and that impeachment should be pursued?
Well, I think here's the thing. There's a lot of people in the media and on, again, across the ideological spectrum keep setting up this false dichotomy that we can't talk about impeachment, we can't talk about issues at the same time. And, I work in electoral politics full time on elections. And there's no candidate that's going to go out and run on impeachment. It's not a voter issue. It's a rule of law issue. And you would talk about rule of law, which I think the candidates did. But I think there's this sort of fallacy that we can't go down the impeachment road because it's going to suck the oxygen out of, any discussion about health care. And that's just not true. It didn't happen in 2018. I don't know a single candidate who ran on I'm not Donald Trump. It's not that you don't talk about it. It's more that it's an issue in the context of all these other things like healthcare and the economy and education. That's what actually gives it ballast, when you're actually on the ground talking to voters.
Well, right,
so I think.
But sorry to interrupt. But on the issue of impeachment, though, I mean, in your piece in New Republic, you sort of suggest that Nancy Pelosi has given up the willingness to make an argument, and that's how you move public opinion is by making an argument. And so it would put pressure on Pelosi and to a lesser extent Schumer to maybe make those arguments or make them more forcefully if you had the presidential candidates weighing in on the topic too. I'm not saying anybody's going to run on that, lead with that, but I mean, we heard about DC statehood yesterday. Talk about esoteric issues. I mean, this is sort of a center cut topic for Democrats, I would think.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why, and this wasn't an issue of the candidates don't submit their own questions.
No, I
the
understand.
moderator's not bringing it up, but
yeah,
I think part of it was that every candidate on the stage has been pretty vocal that they support an impeachment process. So there's kind of nothing to differentiate them, and the primary debates are about distinguishing between those candidates, not necessarily distinguishing between, how does a Democrat differ from a Republican? We already know the answer to that.
But the only thing there is that there may be differing interpretations of what we should do in the wake of the Mueller testimony. That's a big moment, and nobody's opined on that at the presidential level in terms of what going forward looks like.
Yeah,
look,
I would have liked that question to have been asked. I don't think that, and granted, I'm politically engaged by definition. I know where the candidates stand on it. I don't think that people who are engaged enough to watch the primary debates have any real question about it. But I would have been happy if they'd asked the question.
Yeah, if they talked about that, they didn't talk about Russian interference. But who do you think was the clear winner last night, or was there one?
I think it was probably Warren. I think it's easier. There are people who sort of did better than I would have expected. And then I think the reaction to the people who are the more centrist, and the centrist, I'm thinking of Hickenlooper, Delaney, and Bullock kept getting up and saying, well, my centrism is synonymous with pragmatism, but not really offering any evidence to back that up. And I don't think voters really buy that. They do have to come in with, they're going to make a centrist case. They have to come in with an actual roadmap for getting some stuff done. And it still needs to be somewhat aspirational. It can't be, I'm not going to change anything. We're just going to keep the status quo. And I think they sort of failed to do that, which is not to say that any of them can't come back and, figure it out. We're still a long ways from November. But I think the progressive candidates have been better about articulating concrete tactical plans. So, there's plenty of time for shifting, but that's where I came down.
In your piece in the New Republic I referenced, you write that for Pelosi, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other members of the so-called squad are viewed as liabilities instead of opportunities. Develop what you mean by that, particularly in the context of presidential politics, where perhaps one of the concerns Pelosi has is just the attention they're getting overshadowing the attention on the presidential nomination process.
Well, here's where they help. I mean, they're all very media savvy, and some of it might just be generational. But they are doing a certain amount of agenda setting for the party. They are putting healthcare, universal healthcare on the table. They're putting the kind of ambitious structural plans on the table that people do want to see. So I think the Pelosi's sort of squabbles with them really have more to do with prioritizing, how Democrats talk about these issues. They have to do with wanting the squad to kind of take their cues from leadership and more senior people. And, I understand Pelosi's frustration with the fact that she can't control every single piece of it. But I think it's a big mistake to, throw them under the bus because of it, especially publicly. They are representative of where the energy in the party is right now, especially with younger voters and younger people who are looking at running for office. And so I think it's a mistake to dismiss them out of hand or to try to suppress what they're doing because, that is an opportunity. It needs to be harnessed and it needs to be developed or we don't have, long-term strategy for the party.
She is Elisabeth Spiers. She's the founder of the Insurrection, a progressive digital strategy and polling firm. She's former editor-in-chief of the New York Observer, and her piece that I've been referencing is at newrepublic.com, Beyond Pelosi. Elisabeth, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning